Okay, let's get into it. A.D.D. and Adderall talked a lot about my relationship with the medication that I was given for attention deficit disorder. And I won't be a broken record and go on and go on and go on and again and again. However, I'm going to tell the story of the other side of the equation today. Today we're going to get into the history of Adderall. I'll do some kind of intro. Adderall, Adderall, Adderall. Are you ready? I never knew I could be so into you. Adderall. So, before we can actually get to the history of Adderall, we have to go through the history of amphetamine. Why? Adderall is an amphetamine. Adderall is amphetamine. Amphetamine is Adderall. Adderall is not like amphetamine. Adderall is not a similar substance to amphetamine. Adderall is not in the umbrella of amphetamine. If you're curious, Adderall is amphetamine. Period. There's nothing different except the name. Adderall, to be specific, is 4 different amphetamines stacked on each other. Makes it the best amphetamine for about 2/3 of its life. Adderall came under many different names. This book here is called On Speed. Very clever title from Nicholas Rasmussen. I'm probably going to be flipping through it and to give some more detail, but right off the dome, what I remember is in 1932, so many years ago, this guy named Stanley Alls, Gordon Alls was Alls. He was a chemist over in California at University of California, San Diego, I want to say. A chemist, doing the chemist thing, just making chemistry, whatever. He was a good chemist. He taught chemistry, he studied chemistry, he was in the chemicals. He didn't really make his mark until this happened. Everyone had asthma back then. No one really knew why. I'm sure people study it. I didn't study it. The reason people had asthma, according to me, my guess is that because automobiles were new and there was all this new pollution in the air. Let's just say that. It could be totally wrong. Everyone was suffering from asthma, nonetheless, in the late 20s and early 30s. And they found that by extracting adrenaline straight from pigs, actually going into the endocrine glands or whatever, the gland you go into, and extracting actual adrenaline, and giving it to people, it was, of course, open the bronchial cavity, allowed more, if you can't breathe, you go into that adrenaline response, your throat opens, you get more vascular, and oxygen comes back. And the people who made this adrenaline pills, or however they were giving it back then, in leeches or something, whoever was doing that, they were making a boatload of money, and I'm talking bucks here. So then for the first time in history, a pharmaceutical company, I believe GlaxoSmithKline or SmithKline, they were using adrenaline before. I see. So they were using adrenaline for asthma, but then they started using ephedrine, which you could take by a pill, not by a leech, or however they gave you adrenaline. So once they were doing that, they were able to patent it, because when you made it synthetic, you could patent it. So before, if I was using ephedra, obviously the plant we were extracting ephedrine from, I cannot patent ephedra because it's owned by the great land of Earth. So by creating a synthesized version of ephedra called, phenylethylamine, there were nose drops that were reasonable for congestion and clearing up bronchial passages. So in 1929, Gordon Alls, aside from all of his other swinging California 20s drug research, he started looking into one called phenylisopropylamine, soon to be known as Adderall. Gordon Alls had himself injected with 15 milligrams of amphetamine, because back then, when you made something, you said, you know what, this is my baby, this is my creation, bring it on. So he took it. They considered this practice morally necessary. I think all the people making drugs need to take them. There's a typewritten document that really doesn't say much, but it says that he basically had a feeling of well-being and that he was up all night and thoughts seemed to jump from one to another, and 50 milligrams is a pretty serious dose. Until then, scientists were just pursuing the knowledge of chemistry and pursuing what it means to, they were pursuing it. Just knowledge. They just wanted to know stuff. Gordon Alls, however, he was the first time a university chemist was paid by a pharmaceutical company to find a drug to compete. They wanted something to compete with the ephedra that was doing so well for asthma. So he realized that, the blood pressure it's similar enough. I don't know, I'm not a chemist. But amphetamine, he said, maybe this will work for asthma, This is an interesting thing. And actually, to really get to its history, about 100 years before that, in Russia, Ukraine, some fella, he discovered amphetamine while working on synthesis for kerosene or something, and he is just like, this is a useless chemical. He wrote it down in his notes that he came across it. He's like, I don't care about this molecule. He didn't inject 50 milligrams of it into himself, you know what I'm saying? So Alls makes this and he starts testing it on asthmatics, and he gives it to them and they're like, wow, this is awesome. I love this, but I still have asthma. But damn, this is cool. I'm gonna go home and clean my apartment. It's just they give an Adderall. As we know now, it's a very addictive chemical, and it makes you feel awesome, and it makes you productive, and it makes you just like let's go. In the beginning, how can you say no, right? It's true. Alls patented this drug. He owned the patent in 1932. Blah blah blah. So there was a whole lot of lawyering that went on with Gordon Alls and SmithKline and French, presently known as GlaxoSmithKline. He owned the patent, but they were like, screw you, dude. We're selling this. We're huge. You're just a dude, And we're a pharmaceutical giant. You're a dude. So the legal nonsense, I'm not interested in it. He wanted money. They wanted money. That was their intention. Was not to heal asthma. No offense to asthmatics. It kind of set the tone for a century of medicine, is this new idea that you don't take herbs, you don't drink tea, you don't change your lifestyle, you got a problem, you take a pill, son or daughter. So they put it on the shelves, man. They sold it over the counter. Back then, they were selling all kinds of groovy shit behind the counter. You could get morphine, cannabis, I don't know, man. Everything was over the counter. So now all these different psychiatrists and physicians and everyone is just taking a look at this pill and being like, what is this? This changes the game, because there was nothing like this before. This is out of the realm of, in terms of energy and change in mood like that. So Charles Bradley, a psychiatrist at a children's mental institution in Rhode Island, tried this drug on all the kids who with learning disabilities that had what they called neurological program. They called it minimal brain damage. They had a lot of weird, kind of messed up ways to address mental illness back then, as we all know. He found that with the really aggressive kids, that benzodrine calmed them down. This plants the seed for A.D.D. Yeah, this guy is seen as discovering A.D.D. and what they call a paradoxical effect. That is when you have someone who's hyperactive and you give them the medicine that makes you hyperactive. They're not hyperactive, they calm down. And they drew all kinds of silly correlations. They were like, hey, we gave this drug to a bedwetter and they stopped wetting the bed. And it's like, oh, that's amazing. And it's like, you gave a kid amphetamine. He didn't sleep. How's he going to wet the bed when he's not sleeping? SmithKline and French were like, okay, that's intense research you done there, Bradley. we're going to go on and look at adults, all right? So you just table that idea for like 50 years. One of the interesting things is, even in the late 30s, one of the first applications of this drug is that university students were getting it to cram for tests. And I believe that this is where this drug just belongs in our culture. If made at home. College kids need to be taking amphetamines because they don't even want to study. So, it was home. A New York Times from 1937 called it high-octane brain fuel, which is a great description of amphetamine. They called it a powerful but poisonous brain stimulant. That's true. So, I wouldn't be surprised if teachers were doing it too. So the expectations of college and universities were already starting to get crazy, and we don't need to talk about the socioeconomic implications of higher learning to begin with. I'm not going to sit here and read this book to you. I do highly recommend it. Amphetamine, went on to create warriors. So after that, amphetamine in the British Air Force, we were kind of sharing this with the Brits, and they started using it for pilots. And they were saying, because we didn't have pressurized airplane cabins at that time, no one figured out the gasket yet. So it was freaking cold in an airplane. And the bomber pilots who were dropping bombs to do the bombs, they were super high up, and they were cold, and they were getting a little woozy. So they were like, well, if this pill raises your blood pressure, maybe the pressure from the thin air will combat with the pressure from your body if you take an amphetamine. Yeah! So the pilots were popping amphetamines, and, once again, they're like, I'm still cold, still kind of, just like the asthmatics were like, I don't know, but the thing is, I didn't get tired. I was able to fly on that mission, no problemo, and I saw my targets, and I was precise and my thing, because it gives you this cognitive upper hand through means of confidence. Really interesting reaction. But this isn't the chemist. Then, what happens? The pilots are taking amphetamines. So, the ones who were winning the war were on amphetamines. And they were giving it to soldiers, and they were starting to be like, hey, there's something to this. And then over time, I'm not going to give dates and times because we just don't have the time for those kinds of details. It had a lot of side effects, and they're like, all right, let's market these side effects. So they marketed happiness and good feeling of well-being. It really lifts you up. It makes you feel really good. Of course, when you come off of it, you feel pretty bad. So, but they're not worried about that. Just keep taking it, and you'll stay good. So, Mother's Little Helper, as you may have heard it from the song with the Rolling Stones. Bored housewives, because you have this era where women stay home, look after the house in suburbia, and they drop the kids off at school, and then they sit there. They don't have jobs, they just wait. And people need to do things, okay, to feel purposeful and good. So they invented this class of drug called the antidepressant. It was an amphetamine. The first antidepressant was benzodrine or dexedrine or something adrene. It was that. And another side effect of the drug is you lose a lot of weight. And orbital, which is actually the most similar chemical construction in terms of sulfates and sulfides of different amphetamines to Adderall, came around. Orbital, weight loss drug. A whole generation was born from just taking benzodrines. I mean, Jack Kerouac, Bob Dylan, John F. Kennedy, William Burroughs, Ken Kesey, Hunter Thompson, Johnny Cash, Ayn Rand, Hitler, Judy Garland, Lenny Bruce, Philip K. Dick, Paul Erdo, and Charlie Parker. So when Charlie Parker quit heroin and he quit drinking, he still took amphetamine. He considered that not to be a breach of his sobriety. And the amphetamine use totally just zinged off to the bebop jazz. And if you know bebop jazz, like we wouldn't have had that without amphetamine. That was just, and although I don't take amphetamine anymore, I look romantically at that state of mind, because that to me is my personal history of Adderall. there's this whole movement in the world, like speed freaks. Nixon came and he's like, oh, you're all doing too much drugs. So Controlled Substance Act of 1971 comes through, and then now amphetamine is there's a scheduling of drugs, like this one first and then that one. So amphetamine became Schedule 2, which means you got to get a doctor to give it to you, and it's dangerous. It has some medical benefits, but it's illegal. And the pharmaceutical company, I don't know if it's GSK or, they're all wheeling and dealing their patents and their generics and stuff like that. So who really cares which one of them owned it? But nonetheless, what they did was they were like, all right, well, we've had this other thing on the back burner we call Prozac. So they put Prozac on the market now that amphetamine carved out this space for a chemical antidepressant. But now that amphetamine was off the market, and for a while they could only give it to narcoleptics, I think, or something like that, because it was just like people were taking speed and going nuts. You had William Burroughs shooting his wife. You had all these people going crazy. Because over time, like I said in the beginning, it seems like it's too good to be true. It's a great situation, but then it's a deal with the devil in terms of the long-term effects start to reveal themselves, and you have something called amphetamine-induced psychosis, which they actually used to induce a state of schizophrenia in mice to try to cure schizophrenia. It's crazy scientists. They're making mice schizophrenic with amphetamines and then trying to chill them out with diazepam or whatever. So, anyways, the SSRI is introduced to replace the amphetamine as the go-to antidepressant. They decide to remarket the amphetamine because these companies, they have such a surplus, and you have a supply but a limited demand, because Richard Nixon was like, argh. They looked back at Bradley's discoveries about children and about hyperactive children, specifically about how it had a reverse effect on hyperactive kids to slow them down, and they said, oh, there's something to that. So it's kind of debated whether or not ADD was like help us, we have all these attention deficit disorder children, or if they were like, hey, this drug makes kids who are kind of hyper chill out. It's like, is that a disease? They're like, I guess, In the mid-90s, ADD was put into the DSM-4, I want to say. You could fact check this later. And then it was given to me in 1996. Amphetamine is rebranded. Dexedrine sounds a little too industrious, so Adderall comes, and I think Adderall is really clever because the first 3 letters are A.D.D. They're like, hey, we're still taking it today, and they're prescribing it for binge eating disorder. They're prescribing it to children. It started out as just a little thing in some guy's tube. It created a whole beat generation of people who wrote crazy good books. We wouldn't have so much great art if it wasn't for amphetamine. And a lot of other chemicals, to be perfectly honest. And it's a drug that's still around today. I took it for a really long time. I don't take it anymore because I want to be a normal person. Everyone has their reasons. Who knows where it's going? Because we've only been experimenting with it as a culture for almost 100 years now, and we just keep giving it to people. And I think if you look at the industriousness of the middle of the century in terms of work ethic, at least looking back historically, there seemed to be a pretty good work ethic. I think that it's impressive, and I think that amphetamine had a lot to do with that, more or less, because in the 80s, cocaine seemed to be the drug of choice, probably because amphetamine was now in the Controlled Substance Act, and they weren't selling amphetamine like they were selling cocaine, and the total disrespect to the coca plant that occurred back then, and it seemed to have fueled Wall Street in the 80s, and now they're just on Adderall, and you have all these people who, in my opinion, instead of saying, I like this drug, they say, I have this problem. Because, as an adult, not having someone say, hey, you're a difficult student, medicating you would make my life easier as a teacher, or something like that. You have people who are saying, life is difficult, it would be easier if I had a drug. And that's not how we verbalize that situation. We verbalize it as, I have ADD, I need medication. That may be a controversial point of view, but it's the one that I developed after years of taking drugs, and a lifetime, almost a lifetime, minus 7.5 years of being told I was ADD. So, Adderall is there at the pharmacy. In this country, it's legal in a lot of countries, but it's illegal in a lot of countries. But of course, it's legal in the United States, like Uruguay, New Zealand, England, probably Canada. And it was all invented by some guy to make money.